Hey everybody, this video is about nourishing your own creativity. And let me start by introducing myself. I am Bart Everson, formerly known as a media artist. Recently updated my job title to creative generalist. And I made another video about what that means. By all means, check it out. It's in our YouTube channel. But I wanted to share with you some thoughts about this whole creative process. We'll cover teaching as a creative act. We'll dispel some unhelpful myths, get into what creativity actually is, and then share some tips for supporting your own creativity. So let's start off with teaching. You know, it may be a challenge to think of the teacher as an artist. What is our product, after all? A sculptor produces a sculpture, but what do we produce? Students are not our products, but we nurture their creativity, or we should, I think. Perhaps it is the performance itself, the performance of teaching. But of course, as we know, the stand-up routine is not essential. Good teachers don't just lecture, right? Perhaps it's our research, our publications. Well, what about service? All of these things perhaps might count in some way. It might be more helpful to focus on process rather than product. In any case, I think we can agree it's a truism that good teachers are creative. And I also recommend a really eloquent article by David Colin on this topic. It's on our wiki. I'll share the link in the notes and at the end of this presentation. Let's look at some myths. There's a lot of crazy ideas about creativity. Crazy, not so crazy, sometimes not so helpful. We might start with the notion of the creative type. You know, the idea that the only creative people are artists and poets and musicians. But in reality, all humans have a creative capacity. As Shelley Carson says, creativity is vital in virtually all aspects of the human enterprise, from business to sports to how you raise a family to how you find a life mate. And as opposed to the individual, we also have the collective, right? The idea of creativity by committee. In our institutions, a lot of times we get together people in a team and say, do something creative. But maybe that's a myth as well. You know, Steve Wozniak, you might have heard of him. He says, most inventors and engineers I've met are like me. They live in their heads. They're almost like artists. In fact, the very best of them are artists, and artists work best alone. So he says, I'm going to give you some advice that might be hard to take. And that advice is work alone. Not on a committee, not on a team. We also have Adrian Vernon saying evidence from science suggests that business people must be insane to use brainstorming groups. If you have talented and motivated people, they should be encouraged to work alone when creativity or efficiency is the highest priority. But we could take that too far, right? We have another myth, the myth of splendid isolation. Because, after all, we do need social support. Teresa Amabile says an analysis of 12,000 daily journal entries from 238 people from 7 different companies revealed people were more creative when they viewed their work environment in a positive light. They felt they had their bosses and their coworkers' support. They perceived their projects as challenging, but they have the autonomy to complete these projects. So we all need the nourishment of a good, positive social framework. And speaking of frameworks, another myth might entail this idea of structure, that creativity is somehow opposed to structure, that we want to be free to bebop and improvise and scat all over the place, and that structure is the enemy of that? No, not really. In fact, structure gives you the opportunity to think outside the box, because without structure, there is no box. Glenn Stansbury says that. He says real creativity comes when you're able to work around the structure and the limitations that are in place. And structure also ensures that the project isn't too wide open, that the scope isn't set too broad. Information technology is certainly something that everybody's got an opinion about these days, right? It touches every aspect of our lives. And that same guy, Glenn Stansbury, says as our lives become more connected to technology, it's more apparent that technology doesn't help with creativity, it actually hinders it, which is ironic because a lot of times we're sold all these new technologies with the idea that they will enhance our productivity, that they will enhance our creativity, when in fact, as Stansbury also notes, information technology zones us in on the computer screen or the phone, and it keeps us scatterbrained. It could be argued that technology helps with idea capture, but the best things for creativity sometimes is breaking away from the technology. Shifting gears a little bit, we've got the myth of the idea that children are more creative than adults, and also furthermore that school just drums it out of us, right? We start off creative and then the system grinds us down. But as Jeffrey Thomas says, name me one significant work of art produced by a child. And as for Mozart, he says, forget it. His youthful works are just derivative. Yeah, he was precocious, but he would be only a footnote in musical history if he died at age 18. School and society do not squash creativity. In fact, they make it possible. So if you work in the education biz, take heart. Certainly one of the most iconic myths of creativity is the bolt of inspiration. And it does happen from time to time, and that's really cool. But mostly creativity is about hard work. Improvisation requires a lot of sweat equity. In other words, practice, practice, practice. And we also have this kind of mythical conflation of originality with creativity. You might call this the myth of modernism. That's what Jeffrey Thomas says. In fact, creativity implies value, but originality does not. I mean, look at this guy. He's wearing his tie backwards, his suit backwards. It's very original, but it's not necessarily creative. All right, those are some myths. Let's get in then to some definitions of what creativity actually is. Understanding creativity, we call this. All right. It's interesting to note that creativity was not considered one of the classical virtues. In fact, it wasn't even the province of humans. It was a divine attribute. So you can think of the muses imparting creativity to human beings. But these days, in our modern times, we see it as a legitimate topic for scientific inquiry. In fact, psychology is one of the domains that would be looking at this the most, but really many different disciplines have an interest in understanding creativity. And that leads us to some dueling definitions. You could say that creativity is defined in different ways as the tendency to generate or recognize ideas and alternatives or possibilities that may be useful in solving problems, communicating with others, just entertaining ourselves. That's Robert Franken. Possibly the most authoritative academic on this topic would be Robert Weisberg, who, this is the definition that really stuck with me: novel products of value. It really is pithy and to the point. So creative can refer to the person who produces the work. Yes, that's true, but then creativity then refers to both the capacity to produce such works and the activity of generating such products. Both the capacity and the activity. And of course, the famous Mihaly with the long last name that I always stumble over. The guy wrote about flow, says that creativity is commonly used to refer to people who appear to be unusually bright, the brilliant folks. Also, it could mean those who are personally creative, who experience the world in novel and original ways, and then going all the way to individuals who have changed our culture. People like Einstein or Picasso, these big names, they're easier to discuss because their work is so public. And he argues that this is not a continuum. Other people have said differently. And finally, Dean Keith Simonton brings us this really short and sweet phrase, adaptive originality. Remember, we said earlier that originality and creativity are not the same thing. We have to throw an adjective on there, adaptive, when you're trying to be original to solve a problem or to accomplish something, to adapt to the conditions, then maybe that's sufficient to make the distinction. All right, so those are some definitions. We also do have some empirical research in this area. Some empirical findings. It has been shown that trauma in childhood or in adolescence is correlated with creativity in later life. But it's also correlated with juvenile delinquency or suicidal depression. So it's not exactly something that we want to actively seek out. There's also the mad genius. This might not be a myth. You might have thought this would be under the myth category, but there is some empirical findings that suggest the rate of psychological disorder is indeed higher in creative types than in the general population. But also, creative types tend to have traits such as high ego strength. They remain in self-command. They exploit their eccentricities. They tend not to reach truly pathological levels. So, madness may be a consequence rather than a cause. We have also some theoretical issues. The nature-nurture issue, in particular, remains unresolved. The very term was coined by Francis Galton, who is one of the earliest psychometric researchers looking into, you guessed it, creativity in the late 1800s. So he's the one who coined the term, nature versus nurture. And then coming back to this idea of creativity with a capital C, like big, massive creative acts that change the course of history versus those little tiny acts of creativity that make up everyday life. Despite what Mihaly says, research evidence does indicate that these are simply different regions of a continuum. All right, so much for our theory. Let's look at some tips for supporting your own creativity, some practical tips, some things that you can do. And we'll start off by saying, schedule it. That's right, schedule your creativity. That's right, plan for creative time every day. Yes, every single day should have a little creativity in it. Why not? And that means also beware of all these other things that suck your time away. In particular, of course, we know information technology can do that, the ubiquitous information technology that we mentioned earlier. So schedule time for your email and other things in order to contain and corral that so it doesn't, take over your entire life. You might also consider the 5% creativity challenge. This is an idea from Josh Linker. Set aside 5% of your work week. That's just 2 one-hour sessions to think, to reflect, to create. Josh Linker writes, Get away from your desk to a place of inspiration, an art museum, a park, a historic landmark. Turn your phone off and your ideas on. Schedule the time and treat it with the same importance as any other business meeting. And he says he's had individuals and companies try this approach and they report two big gains. One, a 0% drop in productivity. Well, that's not a gain, I guess. But it turns out that it's not that hard to cram 40 hours of tasks into 38 hours. So you're not going to be any less productive because you take this time away from those tasks. And number two, a tremendous gift. It becomes a tremendous gift to the organization, the institution, which becomes flooded with new ideas and fresh thinking. It's also a gift to the individual, because creativity is one of the most powerful sources of human joy, fulfillment, and renewal. Give it a try for 30 days. And if you like it, keep it going. The 5% Creativity Challenge. On a similar note, you might create rituals, especially morning rituals, or whatever works best into your day. Little rituals and routines that make creativity a part of the rhythm of your day. And be prepared. Be prepared to capture ideas whenever they occur. Remember, we mentioned earlier that one of the saving graces of this ubiquitous information technology age that we live in is the ability to capture ideas. Most of us are with our phone all the time, right? So you can use the different capacities of your phone to record a voice note or jot down some text at a moment's notice. Capture those ideas before they get away. And exercise. Yes, actual exercise. In fact, this entire video that I'm sharing with you was really inspired by something Haruki Murakami wrote, the famous author. He says when he's in writing mode for a novel, he gets up at 4 a.m., works for 5 to 6 hours. In the afternoon, he says he runs 10 kilometers, then swims for 1,500 meters, or does both. Then he reads for a bit and listens to some music. I go to bed at 9 p.m. and I keep this routine every day without variation. The repetition itself becomes the important thing. It's a form of mesmerism. I mesmerize myself to reach a deeper state of mind. But to hold such repetition for so long, 6 months to a year, it requires a good amount of mental and physical strength. And in that sense, writing a long novel is like survival training. Physical strength is as necessary as artistic sensitivity. I printed that out. I read it again and again, like every day, and it led to this video that I'm sharing with you now. On a similar note, just as we need to exercise the mind, the body, we may need to have meditation for the mind. We may need to cultivate mindfulness. In fact, studies show that people who do mindfulness meditation gain as much as 10 IQ points. Now, I know we're all justifiably a little skeptical of IQ, but it is these results, this research indicates that we're measuring something. And Josh Aronson, who's visited us here at Xavier, says that it seems to indicate that it works on the ability to screen out irrelevant information. In other words, to focus intently on what's relevant, which of course frees up the resources, our mental resources, to solve problems. And on a similar note, just like meditation can seem like a break from all this furious cogitation and thinking, we also need to honor our need the body and mind has for sleep. We need to sleep. Some make a case for creative insomnia, but most research indicates otherwise. Most Americans are sleep deprived. Don't let it happen to you. We need our dreams at night. We also need to dream during the day. That great idea that comes in the shower, that's a daydream. And research from Baird and Schooler of UC Santa Barbara supports the idea that allowing the mind to wander fosters creativity. No big surprise. Let it happen. Allow the time for it to happen. And in our work of education, of course, it should be no surprise that we need to keep learning. It should be an easy sell, right? That we're lifelong learners. We need to continue our education. And we can also enhance our own creativity by supporting the creativity of others. Sometimes it can be a little intimidating to see somebody who's so good at something that we're not. But exposing ourselves to work by others who approach the form differently, it's good for us. It expands our horizons, and it's good karma to throw some money in the tip jar there. And we got to improvise. We got to learn to improvise. Some of us are more comfortable than others. You got to get out of your comfort zone and make things up. In fact, the fear that some of us might associate with improvisation is actually necessary. Fear and frustration trigger innovative thinking. So we need to indeed challenge ourselves. That's what getting outside of the comfort zone means. Taking risks. Coming back to the myth of the child, we can nevertheless say that it is a good idea to be childlike, to hang out with kids, or just to act like one, to learn to play, to infuse our work with a spirit of play. You might keep a journal. You'll find not only is it a creative act to make notes on what you did and what happened during the day, but you'll find also insight into the things that you're working on, insights into the creative process itself that will emerge over time. And finally, anticipate roadblocks. The path will not always be clear. Sometimes we'll encounter blockages. Don't get discouraged. That's just part of the creative process. So I've jabbered on for far too long here. I welcome your thoughts, your ideas, complaints, suggestions. Reach out. Don't be shy. That's some ideas about nourishing your own creativity. Oh, you might wonder also, what about artificial intelligence? I would recommend this recent research by Harsh Kumar and others, Human Creativity in the Age of LLMs. You can actually find my interview with Harsh on our podcast. And I do need to say that all photos in this presentation are in the public domain. You can find more resources on our wiki, catwiki.zula.edu. It's been my honor, a blessing, and a privilege to be able to share these ideas with you. Thank you for your time, for your attention. I encourage you to think of Cat and me, Bart Everson, your creative generalist, as your creative partners. So when I say reach out, I mean, don't be shy. Do feel free. You want to kick some ideas around, brainstorm a little bit, or get down to brass tacks on how technically to solve a problem, we're here for you. Thanks again. Take care and be well.